In this video, we'll take our first look at the state machine editor. That's an editor inside Amazon Sumerian that allows you to create behaviors, interactivity, and in our case, animations. We'll create a behavior that allows the centrifugal pump to scale up and down in size when clicked by a user. So let's get started. To get started, what we need to do is click on the entity we want to work on. In this case, the centrifugal pump. So I have the whole thing selected. Remember, there are various parts to this the centrifugal pump. So there's the casing, the drive shaft, and so forth. I want to add this behavior onto the entire pump. In the next video, we're going to be adding on behaviors to individual pieces of the pump. But this one, we want to scale up and down the entire pump. So make sure you have the whole thing selected. All right, now to get started with this, we'll click Add Component, and then we will scroll down to the State Machine component. The State Machine is the component and the editor that allows you to edit behaviors on particular entities. So notice how I have no behaviors. I click the plus button to add a new behavior. This opens up the State Machine editor. I'm going to first, and this is always best practice, to name your behaviors. So I'm going to call this one click/emit behavior. It's going to be a very simple behavior with just two states. Really describing what the state machine is and how it works can be a little bit more confusing than just looking at it in action. So let's just go ahead and do that. It starts off by giving me one state, but it doesn't have anything attached to it. There's no actions. So I first want to have it selected, and I want to rename it click. I will then add an action onto it, and I will search for the click/tap on entity action. What this does is that if you are using a mouse or a trackpad, it allows you to click on an entity. If you're using a device with a touch screen, you'll be able to tap on it, and it'll do the same thing. So I will click Add for this state. I then click Add State again. And if I didn't mention this, but I hid these two panels by clicking this little hide button here. I collapse those. Just give me a little bit more space to work with. All right, it gives me another state. I'm going to rename this one emit. I'm going to click add action, search for emit. Now this is an important concept within Sumerian, and an important feature is the idea of the system bus. The system bus is really a feature that allows you to emit messages out into the world in your Sumerian scene, and then listen to those messages to perform other behaviors or to initiate other behaviors. So in this case, I want to emit a message out into the world after I click on it. So the channel that I want to, or the message is really going to be the channel. I'm going to call it clicked. All undercase. It's important to keep that in mind. I'm then going to click add action and just add on this or transition action. So now I have two states, click and emit. I'm now going to connect these with transitions by the bottom half of the state is what's called the transition label. If you click and drag from here over to the next state, that'll give me a transition. I also want to be able to do this more than once, and so I will transition back to the click state. So what happens with this behavior? Every time I click, it'll transition and it'll emit this quote-unquote clicked message out into the world. Very simple state or very simple behavior, but we're also creating this specifically so that we can use our scene either on a desktop or in VR or AR. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing it in this way. I now need to create a counterpart or another state to react to the message that is emitted when by this behavior. So I'm going to also select the centrifugal pump once again, and then I'm going to add another behavior. So this creates another behavior, and we're going to call this one scale behavior. Again, I'm going to hide these two panels just to give myself more space. So let's think about this. If we need this to start, if this behavior needs to be initiated by listening for a message, what do you think we need to actually have it start with? Probably a listen state. So I'm going to name state 1 listen, and then I'm going to search for, there we go. Then I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to search for the listen action. Not the DOM event listener, just the listen action. Now remember, the message that we emitted in our last behavior was clicked, and we want to create the same thing here. So I'm going to type in clicked. We now need to add another state. In the next video, we're going to create some other behaviors that get initiated by this behavior. So I'm not going to explain exactly what this is for, but we do need to emit a message here. So we're going to call this one emit and scale up. And the first action we want to add is another emit message action. So just follow my lead on this one. We'll get into, in the next video, we'll explain what this is actually going to be doing and why this is important. So we'll just add an emit message with the channel being explode. All right. Next, we need to add another action, and we're going to be looking for tween scale. If I type tween, you see there are a bunch of different tween actions. Tween is really the idea of in between. So it shows you the change of an entity from one state to another state, oftentimes like physical changes. So either location, materials, how it's positioned, how it's rotated, and different textures and things like that. So think of it really as a tween action being some sort of animation action. The one we want is scale, because we want it to scale up and scale down. I'll click add. And the scale we want to increase it to is 3 by a factor of 3. So I'll go 3 on all axes. I will unselect relative. The time we will leave at 1 second. The easing type, which really just adds a more interesting looking animation. I will select exponential and then in out for the direction, for easing type and direction. That's not necessary for the functionality of the scene. It just makes it look a little bit more interesting. We need to make 2 more states, but instead of starting from scratch, I actually can just reuse the states I've already created. So I'm going to click the listen state and then select duplicate state. I'll move it over here. So this has a listen action that's listening for the clicked message. I'm then going to select the emit and scale up and duplicate that one as well. But I need to make a few changes with this second one. So I'm going to, instead of scale up, I'm going to call it scale down. And I need to change the scale values back to 1 by 1 by 1. Finally, I need to connect all of my states with transitions. So from the transition label on the bottom half of the state, I drag it from one state to the next. One thing I didn't cover in the last behavior is that you want this behavior to be your initial state. So if you have this and you accidentally selected set as initial state, and you see how it's a little bit darker, it's not going to work quite right. So you need this one to be set as the initial state. And just so you're aware, for every behavior, I always create the first state as my initial state. But if that gets changed or things aren't working, make sure that your first state that you created is set as the initial state. All right, let's see how this works. I'm going to click play. So remember how my other behavior is set so that every time, let me move this down so we can see you see how it's listening? It's waiting for that to hear that event. So it's highlighted in green. That's the state it's on. It's waiting for me to click on this so that my other behavior will then emit that clicked message. And once I do, it zooms up. And then you see how it's waiting for me to click on it again, because once I do, it'll emit that message for a second time, and then it'll scale down. So it just is going up and down, up and down. And you see how it's kind of going, the animation isn't just linear, it's kind of going slow then fast, and then fast, or slow then fast again. That's the easing type. Just makes it look a little bit more interesting. That's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to create a few more states that allow us to create that exploded view or that exploded animation so that all the different parts separate so that we can investigate and learn in this particular use case about those particular parts of the centrifugal pump. I hope you join us. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments of this video. If you haven't already, please join also our Sumerian community on Slack at slack.sumerian.world.